My name is Elena Whitman, and I never thought the hardest betrayal would come from the people who once tucked me in at night. I arrived at my grandfather's house with a bag of groceries and a warm smile. Brian opened the door, barely looked at me. "Didn't know you were still showing up?" he said. I glanced at my uncle's face, cold, unreadable, then turned to my great-aunt Irene. She crossed her arms. "Shouldn't you be out working your little coffee job?" Then she laughed. "Family matters aren't really your lane, are they?" I stood there holding the groceries. My voice was steady. "If I'm not family, I'll live like I'm not." And I left. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to walk away from a toxic family, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone. I didn't always feel like an outsider. When I was little, Grandpa Walter was my favorite person in the world. While the rest of the family was too busy arguing or pretending to care, he made space for quiet things, like stories and silence and me. He'd pour 2 cups of tea, hand me the one with the tiny chip on the handle, mine, and we'd sit out back under the old oak tree. "Stories," he once told me, "are how we stay alive even after we're gone." He taught high school literature for 37 years. Shakespeare, Steinbeck, Baldwin. Those names rolled off his tongue like music. I didn't understand all the words back then, but I understood him. He was gentle, kind, a little lonely maybe. His wife, my grandmother, passed away before I turned 6. After that, the big family dinners faded. My parents divorced, my mom moved away, and the rest of the family, well, they drifted. Except me. Every weekend, I'd take the bus across town with a backpack full of half-done homework and whatever book I was reading, and he'd be waiting with lemon cookies and that soft little smile. He listened to me, really listened. When I was 12 and wanted to quit piano, he didn't scold me. He asked why. When I told him I felt invisible at home, he didn't try to fix it. He just nodded, poured more tea, and said, "You are not the problem, Elena. Sometimes people are too loud to hear what really matters." That stuck. In high school, while my cousins were sneaking off to parties or posing for social media, I was helping Grandpa sort through old books, fix a leaky faucet, or set up his email for the 3rd time that month. He always called me his evening light. "You've got a quiet strength," he'd say, patting my hand. "Don't ever let the noise of others drown that out." And I tried not to, even when life got messy. I moved out at 19, worked 2 jobs while studying to become a nurse, nights at the ER, days at school, and weekends at the coffee shop. I didn't have much money or time, but I always had Sunday afternoons with Grandpa. That never changed. When I showed up with soup and medicine the first time he got bronchitis, he told me I was the only person who noticed he'd been coughing for weeks. I believed him. Brian didn't call. Irene only sent flowers. No one stayed overnight except me. Even now, I remember those late nights beside his recliner, reading aloud from his favorite poetry collections. He'd drift off with a half smile, and I'd sit there watching his chest rise and fall like I was guarding something precious. Because I was. We didn't talk about wills or inheritance. We didn't need to. Our bond wasn't built on money. It was built on quiet consistency, the kind that never made headlines but meant everything. But not everyone saw it that way. To the rest of the family, I was just the working girl with no career plan, the one who served lattes while they built real businesses, the one who never asked for anything, so they assumed I wanted nothing. They didn't know what Grandpa meant to me, or what I meant to him, and maybe they still don't, but that doesn't change the truth. Because when you've sat beside someone's pain, when you've wiped their brow and held their hand through silence and sickness, that's family. Not who shares your bloodline, but who shares your burdens, and that's a truth I've carried with me, even when the door slammed behind me that day, even when they tried to write me out. I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. I still remember the first time Irene called after years of silence. It was early on a Thursday morning, too early for anyone who didn't need something. "Elena," she said, her voice syrupy and thin, "how's Walter doing these days?" No hello? No how are you? Just straight to him. I told her he was stable, recovering from a mild infection, nothing too serious. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, then paused. "Do you think he might be able to help me out a little? Just until my Social Security clears up?" Irene was like that. The kind of person who could turn a question into a transaction without you realizing you were being charged. I didn't answer her right away. Just passed the phone to Grandpa. They talked for a few minutes. His voice softened the way it always did when she called. Like he was 17 again and still believed everyone could be saved. Afterward, he looked tired. "She's just under pressure," he told me. "You know how life is." I nodded. But I also knew how Irene was. And then came Brian. He showed up a week later, unannounced, standing at the front door like he owned the place. Same slicked back hair, same cologne you could smell 3 rooms away. "Elena," he grinned, stepping inside. "I'm glad you're still here. Grandpa told me you help out a lot. That's sweet." Sweet? As if wiping vomit off the floor and managing medications was the kind of thing you did as a hobby. As if I was playing house. He brought up money within the first 20 minutes, said something vague about property taxes and how complicated the estate might get if things weren't organized early. I watched Grandpa nod slowly, politely. I could tell he didn't want conflict. He never did. "Brian," I said gently, "this isn't the time." He looked at me like I was a gnat buzzing too close to his drink. "I'm just thinking ahead, for Grandpa's sake." But I knew better. Brian wasn't thinking ahead. He was circling. Over the next few weeks, the pattern set in. Irene would call, checking in on Walter with just enough concern to feel rehearsed. Brian stopped by more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with folders he refused to open in front of me. One night, I brought it up with Grandpa. "You don't owe them anything," I said quietly. "You know that, right?" He was sitting in his favorite armchair, blanket over his knees, the lamp casting a soft glow over his lined face. "They're family, Elena. So am I." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were clear, if a little tired. "You're the best part of this family," he said softly. "But blood makes people believe they're entitled, and I'm too old to keep fighting that." That's when I knew. He wasn't naive. He saw it too. The visits with ulterior motives, the phone calls filled with suggestion, the way no one asked him how he was sleeping, what he needed emotionally, if he was lonely. Just money, inheritance, control. And yet he never raised his voice, never shut the door. I admired his grace, but I also feared it. Because grace can sometimes look like surrender, and I wasn't ready to watch him be picked apart piece by piece, memory by memory, just because the people who abandoned him had finally smelled the end coming. So I stayed. Longer hours, more nights. I organized his medications, logged everything, cleaned out the attic when Brian said he might swing by with a realtor. And each time Irene called, I made sure to answer first. Because I could feel it, like a storm sitting just offshore. They weren't back for Grandpa. They were back for what they thought they deserved. But what they never understood was this. What mattered most about Grandpa couldn't be written into a will. It was love. Quiet, persistent, undeserved, and unconditional. And that, they never showed up for. It started with a cough. Not a dramatic, chest-rattling kind of cough, just a dry, stubborn one that wouldn't go away. At first, Grandpa waved it off. "Allergies," he said. "This old house is full of dust." But I knew his rhythms. I knew the way he moved slower when something wasn't right, how he started pushing food around his plate instead of eating, how his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. So I stayed later. I cut back hours at the coffee shop, traded night shifts at the clinic, told my professors I needed flexibility. They understood, or at least pretended to. Either way, I was there, every day. By week 2, he was too weak to climb the stairs. I set up a bed downstairs, filled the house with the smell of tea, soup, and menthol rub. I read to him at night. Dickinson, his favorite. Sometimes he drifted off mid-verse, and I prayed, quietly, at the sink, over his laundry, in the still moments between breathing treatments. Irene didn't visit. Brian stopped by once. Dropped off some organic vitamins and a form labeled Transfer of Executor. Said it was just in case. I didn't even tell Grandpa. Just slid it into the shredder. The night he gave me the letter, it was raining. One of those slow, steady rains that taps the windows like a lullaby. He was awake, but quiet, his voice thin. "Elena," he whispered, in the top drawer of the desk. "There's something I want you to have." I found the envelope. Sealed. No name, no label. Just his handwriting on the front. "When the noise gets loud, trust the quiet inside you." My throat tightened. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding the letter with both hands. He looked at me, eyes glassy but focused. "You've loved me in ways that ask for nothing," he said. "I see that. I always have." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came, just a slow, aching burn behind my eyes. I don't want you to carry bitterness, he continued. They'll come for things, Elena. Let them come, but don't let them take your peace. He coughed, deep and rattling. I helped him sip some water, tucked the blanket higher over his chest. Then he reached for my hand. You're the only thing I ever did right without second-guessing. I sat with him until dawn, just breathing, just being there. As the sky turned pale gray, he drifted into sleep, light at first, then heavier, and then still. There was no drama, no last gasp, just silence. And in that silence, I swear I felt something settle. I called the nurse, called the home doctor. Then I called no one else for a long time. The funeral came quickly, faster than I was ready for. Irene arrived in a black dress 2 sizes too tight, dabbing her eyes with tissue she never used. Brian adjusted his cufflinks more than he offered condolences. They looked around the house like vultures circling an old tree. At the viewing, I stood near the casket as people murmured how peaceful Grandpa looked. And he did. Like the fight had left him long ago and only softness remained. Afterward, as I packed up the guest book and leftover sandwiches, a man approached me in a gray suit. Elena Whitman? He asked. I nodded. I'm Gregory Keene, Mr. Walter's personal legal counsel. There are some documents that will need your attention. Irene glanced over, narrowed her eyes, and I realized, whatever Grandpa had left behind, it wasn't just memories. It was a line drawn in ink. The day of the funeral felt hollow. I'd been running on autopilot for days, coordinating with the funeral home, finding a suit Grandpa would have actually worn, making sure they played Chopin during the service. Not that dreadful organ music they suggested. I didn't cry during the service. I didn't speak, either. I just sat in the front row, hands folded, listening to people say things like, he was so kind and he lived a full life, like they'd been there for any of it. Irene arrived late, of course. Her black hat was too wide, casting dramatic shadows across her face like a woman in an old noir film. She made sure to sigh audibly, to dab her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief that stayed dry the entire time. Brian brought a date. Some woman in high heels and a low-cut dress who chewed gum during the eulogy. They sat 2 rows behind me. I could feel their eyes on my back like a weight. After the burial, I walked alone to the house. Grandpa's house. My house now, though that hadn't quite sunk in. It still smelled like peppermint tea and old pages. The quiet was heavier now. Grief has a sound. It's the absence of every familiar creak and cough. I boiled water I didn't drink, set out 2 mugs, only poured one. Then the doorbell rang. Brian stood there holding a manila envelope and flashing his most professional smile. I figured we'd start sorting through some of the paperwork, he said. You know, ease the burden for you. I blinked. Now? He shrugged. No time like the present. Irene's on her way. Thought we could look at bank statements, the will, the usual. I let him in. Not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to see exactly how fast the performance would fall apart. He walked straight to the dining table, spread out folders like a salesman mid-pitch. I watched him flip through them, each page more invasive than the last. Looks like some accounts are still in his name, he said. You'll want to get those transferred before the state steps in. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like this was all just business. I'll handle it, I said, calm, clipped. Then Irene walked in, all perfume and practiced grief. Elena, sweetheart, she cooed, air-kissing the space beside my face. You've lost so much weight. Are you eating? I'm fine. She glanced around. We'll keep things simple. Grandpa was clear about wanting things equal. I smiled. Was he? That's when I pulled out the sealed letter he gave me. I hadn't opened it yet. I wasn't ready. But just holding it reminded me that he'd thought ahead, that he knew this moment would come. Brian's eyes locked on it. What's that? I tucked it back in my coat pocket. Something personal. He and Irene exchanged a look. Moments later, the doorbell rang again. A different man stood there, tall, gray suit, clipboard in hand. Elena Whitman? He asked. Yes. I'm Richard Latham, from Whitmore and Associates. Your grandfather asked us to handle the official execution of his will. Brian stepped forward. Wait, we already have a... Mr. Latham raised a hand. Unless you're licensed counsel, this matter concerns Miss Whitman directly. Irene's face turned to stone. Mr. Latham smiled politely. "Shall we sit?" We did. He unfolded the original will. Not a copy, not a draft. The real thing. Signed, notarized, updated 2 months ago. He cleared his throat. "To my granddaughter, Elena Whitman, who showed up when no one else did, who offered care instead of conditions, I leave everything." Silence. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Brian broke it first. "This has to be a mistake." Mr. Latham didn't blink. "It's not." Irene stood up, trembling, voice sharp. "She's not even his real granddaughter." But I was already walking to the kitchen. I'd seen storms like this before, and I knew they always blew hardest when they realized the house they wanted was already someone else's home. I didn't sleep much after that night. The will had been read, the lines had been drawn, and I thought, naively, that maybe things would settle, that the finality of Grandpa's words would be enough. But when it comes to people like Irene and Brian, enough is never enough. 2 days after the reading, a man came to the house with a briefcase and a clipboard. He said he represented a firm handling probate consolidation and needed my signature for a routine inheritance release. He spoke quickly, his tie too tight, his smile too wide. I asked for a business card. He didn't have one. I asked for ID. He deflected. When I said I wanted to speak with my attorney before signing anything, his charm cracked just slightly. He nodded, folded the papers, and left without a goodbye. That was the moment my stomach dropped. I called Caleb. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said. Just that word, steady and warm, and I felt like I could finally breathe. I hadn't told him everything yet. We'd only been dating a little over a year, and I'd kept most of the family drama tucked away, like some ugly sweater you don't wear until the holidays. But I told him now. Every word. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, there was silence for a second. Then, "You have a copy of the will?" "Yes," I said. "And the lawyer, Mr. Latham." "Good," he said. "We're not letting this slide." Caleb's calm wasn't passive. It was the kind of calm that moved mountains slowly, one deliberate step at a time. By that evening, he'd already pulled records. Turns out the man who came to my door wasn't affiliated with Whitmore and Associates, or any probate firm at all. His name was connected to a shell company Brian had briefly been listed on as co-founder 3 years ago. That night, Caleb came over with his laptop, 2 mugs of strong coffee, and a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. "You're not just dealing with family greed," he said. "This was premeditated. This wasn't emotional. It was strategic." He opened folders, emails, timestamps, voice memos. Brian had emailed a lawyer weeks before Grandpa died, inquiring about will adjustments. He'd even tried to book a signature verification session for Grandpa, though it had been flagged by the system when the ID didn't match. "They tried to rewrite the story," Caleb said, "but they didn't expect you to know how to read between the lines." I stared at the screen. Names, dates, phrases like witness unavailable and power of attorney transfer attempt. It was like watching someone break into your home in broad daylight. I felt cold, but not broken. "Now what?" I asked. Caleb closed the laptop and looked at me. "Now we get the real lawyer involved, the one your grandfather trusted, and we document everything." I nodded slowly. "Also," he said, standing up, "you need to stop answering the door alone." That made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it reminded me there was still light in the middle of this darkness. The next morning, I called Mr. Latham and told him what we'd found. He didn't sound surprised. "I had a feeling," he said. "Your grandfather was clear about who he trusted and who he didn't. We'll handle it from here. But Elena, this might get ugly." I looked out the window, where Grandpa's oak tree stood, branches bare against the winter sky. "I know," I said, "but I'm ready. Because love doesn't always look like holding someone's hand. Sometimes love looks like standing guard when no one else will. And I wasn't about to let them rewrite the ending to a story they never bothered to read. The truth didn't come in a flash. It came in pieces. Quiet fragments tucked between old file folders, email threads, and a dusty box labeled Wills Previous. Mr. Latham had called me into his office after Caleb's findings. It was a quiet building. No marble floors, no big reception desk. Just rows of bookshelves and the scent of aged paper and coffee. He invited me to sit, slid a folder across the desk. "Your grandfather updated his will 3 times," he said. "The The final version is dated March 2nd of last year, notarized here, witnessed properly, clear, clean, airtight. I opened the folder. There it was. Grandpa's handwriting as familiar to me as my own. My name written with deliberate strokes, not rushed, not mechanical. The wording was simple, humble even. No long explanations, just one line that caught in my throat. To Elena Whitman, who gave without asking, who stayed when others left, I leave the life I built. May she make something more of it. I didn't realize I was crying until Mr. Latham gently handed me a tissue. Then he opened another folder. This, he said, is the version submitted last week by a different representative claiming to act on behalf of your grandfather. I leaned forward. It was similar, but not quite. The font was too clean. The signature? Close, but slanted differently. And the language? It was almost legalistic, cold, precise. Phrases like equal distribution among surviving relatives and executor discretion based on familial consensus. It didn't sound like Grandpa, and that was the point. They used a scanned signature from an old document, Mr. Latham explained, overlaid it digitally. It fooled the notary at first, until we pulled handwriting samples and flagged the inconsistencies. He tapped a paper showing a side-by-side comparison. One signature had soul, the other was a trace job. Caleb sat beside me, arms crossed, jaw tight. I could see the engineer in him working, tracking, verifying, mentally reconstructing the sequence of events. So this was coordinated, I said. Mr. Latham nodded. They knew he was fading, and they moved quickly. Too quickly. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, thin flakes dancing like ash. I thought about the final months. The phone calls Irene kept making. Brian showing up with envelopes he refused to open in front of me. The fake probate guy at my door. They hadn't just hoped to benefit from his death. They'd planned for it, even while Grandpa was still breathing. I want this to go to court, I said. Mr. Latham looked up, surprised but not displeased. We can settle quietly, he said. We have the real documents. It may not need to get ugly. No, I said. They made it ugly. Let it be public. Let people know what they did. Caleb reached over and squeezed my hand, not as reassurance, but solidarity. Mr. Latham leaned back. Very well, he said. We'll file a formal fraud complaint and begin proceedings. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through Grandpa's house, touching the backs of chairs, the bookshelf, the tea kettle still sitting on the stove. Every object whispered something familiar. I paused at the desk drawer where he'd kept the letter for me, took it out again. I still hadn't opened it. I held it in my hands, ran my fingers over the seal. Not ready yet, but soon. In the quiet, I imagined his voice. You're not just defending an estate, Elena, he would say. You're defending what matters. And I knew he was right. Because it was never about the house or the money or the land. It was about memory, about legacy, about making sure love wasn't rewritten by those who never really understood it. The thing about betrayal is that it never walks in the front door. It slips through cracks, creeps into quiet rooms, and pretends to be concern. After the fake will was exposed, Irene and Brian didn't disappear. They just got smarter. They stopped coming to the house, stopped calling, but they didn't stop watching. I could feel it in the mail that started arriving addressed to occupant from strange legal offices, in the way Grandpa's old neighbors avoided eye contact, in the tension that hung in the air like damp smoke. Caleb called it the tightening, the part where people who thought they were in control realize they're losing their grip. They're going to push back, he said. People like this don't vanish quietly. I nodded. I'd already started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand and a legal pad by the bed, just in case. So we got to work. Caleb set up a folder on his laptop labeled Legacy Defense. That was his idea. I probably would have called it Family Mess or Proof I'm Not Crazy, but he liked to keep things clean. We started by mapping the timeline. Date Grandpa signed the will. Date Brian reached out to the fake attorney. Dates of suspicious banking activity. Calls from Irene that were just to check in. It was all there once we laid it out. Patterns formed like bruises. We found a voice memo saved to Grandpa's old phone, one I'd missed. It was dated 10 days before he died. Irene called again. His voice rasped. Wants me to consider fairness. Said Elena's had enough time with me. Enough help. I don't want to fight. But I know what's coming. I hope I made the right choice. I listened to it twice. Then a third time. Not because I needed the evidence, but because I missed the sound of him. His voice was fading already, but even then it held more integrity than everything Irene had ever said to my face. We took screenshots, backed up files. Caleb used a program to pull deleted emails from Grandpa's laptop. One was from Brian, marked urgent. It read, "Need to finalize paperwork ASAP, no time for more delays. If Elena asks questions, stall her." That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. They weren't just hoping for control, they were orchestrating it. There was also an email thread between Brian and a man named Alan S. Kaufman, supposedly a legal consultant. But a quick search revealed that Kaufman had been disbarred 3 years ago. Fraud, document tampering, 2 strikes on impersonation. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. They were trying to slide this through before he passed. The minute he got worse, they moved in. I felt a strange mix of rage and clarity, like everything suddenly made sense, and none of it was okay. "I want people to know," I said. Caleb didn't ask why. He just opened a new folder. Presentation. We organized the files, made a timeline graphic, labeled the forged signatures. We even clipped audio from the voicemail Grandpa left. Not because I wanted to make a show of it, but because I knew what I was up against. This wasn't about proving myself right. It was about proving Grandpa wasn't crazy for trusting me. Late one night, while I was scanning old photos to include in the evidence folder, I found one I hadn't seen in years. It was me and Grandpa sitting under the oak tree, a book open between us. I was maybe 8, legs crossed, listening to him read. He was laughing, a full, open laugh, the kind that made his eyes disappear into crinkles. I stared at it for a long time. Because that moment wasn't fake. That bond wasn't strategic, and no will, no document, no cousin with a God complex could rewrite that. Brian and Irene had money, they had connections, they had years of manipulation behind them, but I had truth, and a man who'd spent his life teaching me how to wield it without fear. So we kept digging, because the deeper we went, the more it became clear. This wasn't just a family disagreement, it was a heist, and we were about to show the world who was really behind the mask. You can tell a lot about people by what they try to hide. While Caleb combed through legal threads and phone metadata, I started digging in places they never expected me to look. Memory, routine, pattern, the kind of small, forgettable things people don't think twice about until they come back to haunt them. It started with a receipt. I was clearing out Grandpa's nightstand, his side of the bed still untouched, and I found a crumpled pharmacy bag with a printed receipt folded inside. Not unusual. But this one had a note scrawled on the back in Grandpa's handwriting. "Ask about notarization, Brian." That question mark burned into me like a brand. I brought it to Caleb. He squinted at the date. This was a week before the forged will was submitted. I flipped the paper over again. He had doubts. He knew. That changed everything. From there, the pieces started falling together faster. The emails Brian had sent to the disbarred attorney weren't just casual inquiries. They included draft attachments labeled new_will_edits and distribution_proposal_final. In one of the drafts, he'd even used Grandpa's old salutation, "With sincere respect," trying to mimic the voice. Only, he misspelled sincere. Twice. We found a call log from Irene's phone to a prepaid burner number that matched the one used by the probate guy who showed up at my door. 3 calls, each under 5 minutes, made the week after Grandpa died. Short, clean, planned. This wasn't just deception, Caleb said. It was layered. They expected resistance. And they planned for it. I sat back, rubbing my temple, feeling a pressure behind my eyes that wasn't quite pain. It was realization. A slow dawning that the people I shared blood with had constructed an entire framework to push me out, and they still thought I was too quiet to fight. I wasn't. We started assembling the case file. It wasn't a legal document yet, it was just a truth bomb waiting for detonation. Documents, voicemails, digital trails, side-by-side signature comparisons, even tone analysis Caleb pulled from email content. We didn't need to embellish. The facts were louder than fiction. But still, we stayed silent. We didn't confront, not yet. I began practicing. In the mirror, in my head, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd say it. I knew there'd be a moment, a crossroads where everything would surface. And when it came, I wouldn't stammer, I wouldn't cry, I would burn clean. One night I got a message from an old neighbor of Grandpa's. Her name was Miss Levine. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and still walked her beagle every morning at 6 sharp. She told me she'd seen Brian walking out of Grandpa's house late one night a week before he passed. He had a folder under his arm, she said. Didn't look like a visit. Looked like business. And your grandfather didn't walk him out. Just stood at the doorway. Looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I thanked her and logged the time, because when you're building a timeline of truth, no detail is too small. Irene, meanwhile, had gone quiet, which for her was the loudest warning sign of all. I knew she was planning something. I could feel it in the way people started calling me less, how cousins stopped returning messages, how one of Grandpa's old friends suddenly un-RSVP'd to the memorial tea I'd planned. She was isolating me, undermining me, which meant I was getting close. The closer I moved to truth, the harder they worked to sever anything that made me credible. It didn't matter. I had Grandpa's letter. I had the original will. I had a man beside me who understood digital forensics better than most small law firms. And I had conviction. Real conviction doesn't roar. It doesn't announce itself in capital letters. It settles in your bones like gravity and makes sure your spine doesn't bend under pressure. So we kept building, one page at a time, one truth at a time. And somewhere in that silence I realized I wasn't just defending a document. I was defending a life that mattered, a love that was real, a man who taught me how to live honestly, even when everyone else wanted to pretend. And that was something worth fighting for. The strangest part of preparing for a battle is how quiet everything gets right before it begins. I stopped answering Irene's calls. She left voicemails with long pauses between sentences, like she was choosing her words too carefully. Like she knew she'd already lost but still wanted to hold the performance together. Elena, sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We should talk. She never used my name so much when Grandpa was alive. Brian went silent too, but his silence was more calculated, the kind you feel in your chest, not your ears. I saw his name pop up on LinkedIn under a new consulting role. The website for his new business used words like integrity and generational value. I couldn't decide if I wanted to scream or laugh. Caleb kept digging, I kept organizing. Our apartment started looking like the back room of a detective's office. Notebooks, thumb drives, voice clips, scanned documents stacked in manila folders with sticky tabs hanging like miniature flags of warning. One night, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, holding the original will. I read it again, slowly, aloud, like I was saying a prayer. To Elena Whitman, who gave without asking. That part always stopped me, because giving without asking had become my default language, not just with Grandpa, but with everyone. I gave up my time, my energy, my weekends, my boundaries for years, and they didn't just take, they expected it, demanded it, and then tried to erase me when I was no longer convenient. But now I was done giving them the benefit of the doubt. We assembled everything into one digital folder, a single secure presentation, each slide time-stamped, each document traced, each signature compared in meticulous detail. Caleb called it the vault. We had voice memos from Grandpa expressing concern over pressure from Irene, copies of the forged documents traced back to Brian's email, metadata showing the forged will was edited on a device registered to Brian, phone logs connecting Irene to the fake notary, a notarized letter from the real attorney confirming the legitimate will. It was airtight, and I didn't plan to say a word about it. Not until the right moment, not until they were comfortable enough to try and corner me. Because people like that never stop pushing. They don't back off. They wait for the perfect time to strike with a smile and a clipboard. So I waited too. Irene texted me a few days later, casually inviting me to Grandpa's 49-day memorial. She said it was a simple family gathering to honor him and wrap things up. No mention of legal disputes, no mention of Brian, just vague enough to sound innocent, just rehearsed enough to make me nauseous. I showed Caleb the message. "This is it," I said. He nodded. "You ready?" I smiled. "I've been ready for 29 years. So we prepared. We printed hard copies of every critical piece of evidence, loaded digital backups onto 2 encrypted drives, one for Mr. Latham, one for me. I chose a simple black dress. Nothing dramatic, but nothing apologetic. A quiet kind of armor. The morning of the memorial, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I thought of Grandpa. I thought of the day I left his house after Irene called me a stranger. Then I whispered to my reflection, "Let's give them something to remember." And I meant it. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about the money. It was about finally standing in a room full of people who once looked through me and making sure they saw me. Not angry, not vengeful, just undeniable. The thing about family events is, they smell like memory, even when the people inside them don't deserve to be called family. The 49th day memorial for Grandpa was held at Irene's house, the house with too many chandeliers, not enough warmth. The kind of place that photographs well and feels cold in every corner. I arrived exactly on time, not early, not late, calculated. I stepped inside carrying nothing but my handbag and a small photo of Grandpa and me under the old oak tree. I placed it near the incense table between the store-bought fruit trays and a crooked vase of orchids. No one noticed. The room was full of people I recognized but didn't trust. Cousins who hadn't visited Grandpa in a decade. Neighbors who used to ask about the garden, now whispering over shrimp cocktails. Irene wore a navy dress and a grief smile she'd perfected for public use. Brian stood near the kitchen, sipping white wine and tapping his phone like a man bored at his own performance. I said hello to no one, just smiled, nodded, floated. It was better that way. I kept close to the perimeter. Let them forget I was there. That's how you see the real show, the backstage moments, the flinches between rehearsed lines. I heard Irene whispering to someone near the hallway. "Don't worry," she said. "We'll settle things today. She's not going to make trouble." Then Brian appeared at my side. "Elena," he said, his voice smooth, like a man who thought charm could erase history. "Thanks for coming." I looked at him for a moment, then simply replied, "Of course." He gestured toward the den. We thought we'd go over some final paperwork after the prayers. Just a few signatures to clear everything, no lawyers, just family. I nodded. Let him believe it. The ceremony started. Incense was lit. Someone read a passage from Grandpa's favorite poetry collection. I recognized the words but not the voice. It trembled for effect, not from love. When it ended, people began to disperse into smaller conversations. Laughter started to creep in. The mood shifted from reverent to casual, as if we hadn't just honored a man whose final days were spent being preyed upon by his own blood. That's when Irene stepped forward. "Elena, sweetheart, would you mind coming into the sitting room? We'll go over those little details." The room quieted just a bit, enough to feel the tension slip in through the cracks. I followed them. Brian closed the door behind us. There, on the table, was a neat stack of papers, glossy folders, tabs labeled agreement, waiver, distribution request. He slid one page toward me. "This is just to release the estate to the family for shared use," he said. "Standard stuff. Everyone's agreed." I picked up the pen, paused, then looked up at them. "You're sure this is what you want me to sign?" Brian smiled, too fast. "Of course." I opened my bag and pulled out a folder of my own, laid it flat. "Then you won't mind if we review this first," I said. Irene blinked. "What is that?" "Evidence," I said, "of a forged will, fake signatures, emails, phone records, and a voice recording of Grandpa saying he feared you'd do exactly this." They stared at me. Brian's face tightened. Irene's lips parted, then closed again like a sentence that forgot how to end. I opened the folder. One by one I laid out the pages. The email with the forged file, the metadata Caleb pulled, the fake notary's name, the disbarment record, the side-by-side signature analysis. I let the silence stretch, then said calmly, "Mr. Latham has copies. The court does too. You're under investigation." Brian stood up. "This is ridiculous." Irene pointed at me, voice rising. "You think a part-time nurse and a barista lawyer boyfriend can—" I cut her off. "You forged a will, Irene. You tried to erase the one person who never left Grandpa's side. And you underestimated the one thing he left behind that wasn't listed in any document. Me." Just then the door opened, and Mr. Latham stepped in. "I believe I was invited," he said, placing a file on the table. "You're both going to want lawyers." I didn't stay for the shouting. I walked out of that room and back into the hollow party, picked up my photo from the incense table, looked one last time at Grandpa's smile. He would have hated the drama, but he would have loved that I stood my ground. And I did. Not just for him, but for the quiet, loyal girl I'd once been, the one they tried to make invisible. They say justice doesn't come with fireworks. But that afternoon, it sure felt like something exploded. Word spread quickly through the house after Mr. Latham stepped into the sitting room. Nobody knew exactly what had happened behind the door, but they saw the expressions on Irene's and Brian's faces when they re-emerged. Pale, tight, cornered, and that was enough. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to raise my voice or make a scene. I just walked into the living room where the rest of the family was sipping tea and picking at fruit platters, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. "Thank you all for being here," I said calmly. Every head turned. Someone's spoon clinked awkwardly against a glass. A cousin cleared her throat. I took a breath, let it settle deep in my chest. Then I pulled a small recorder from my bag and pressed play. Grandpa's voice filled the room, soft, worn, tired, but clear. "Irene called again, wants me to consider fairness. Said Elena's had enough time with me. Enough help. I don't want to fight, but I know what's coming." The silence was thunderous. Some guests looked at their laps, others shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered things like, "Oh my God," or "He really said that." I paused the clip and looked around the room. "I want you to understand something," I said. "I never asked for this. I never wanted to fight. I just showed up. I took care of him. I listened. I was there." My voice stayed steady, but my hands felt electric. "Irene and Brian?" I motioned toward them, now standing by the entryway like statues. "Attempted to forge Grandpa's will. They hired a disbarred attorney, impersonated legal representatives, and pressured him in his final days." Gasps, a dropped teacup, the beginning of a shift. Mr. Latham stepped forward, holding the official file. "These actions are currently under legal review. The original will, fully notarized and witnessed, names Elena as the sole inheritor of Mr. Walter Whitman's estate. All attempts to alter or contest this document have been flagged as fraudulent." Irene snapped. "She's not even blood." The room froze. All those years of quiet slights and whispered judgments boiled into one desperate scream. "She's not even his real granddaughter. My sister's mistake, dropped on our doorstep like a stray. You all act like she belongs here, but she doesn't. She never did." My heart didn't drop. It didn't crack. It solidified. Because I already knew. Grandpa had told me in his own way, through tea and poetry and patience. But hearing her say it in front of everyone was something else. And yet, strangely, it didn't hurt. I stepped forward. "You're right," I said. "I wasn't born into this family. I chose it. And more importantly, Grandpa chose me. Not because of blood, but because I showed up when no one else did." Brian tried to speak. Mr. Latham cut him off. "I advise both of you to remain silent. You're under investigation for attempted fraud, elder coercion, and document tampering. Your assets will be frozen pending review." The hush turned heavy. One of my aunts, who hadn't said a word to me in years, stood up. "Elena," she said softly, "I'm sorry, we didn't know." I didn't answer, because it wasn't about forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This wasn't a day for reconciliation. It was a day for truth. I took Grandpa's photo from my bag, the one of us under the oak tree. I placed it on the table near the altar where someone had left a single candle burning, and I smiled. Not out of triumph, not revenge, but because I could finally breathe. They tried to erase me. Instead, I made myself unforgettable, not by fighting with fire, but by standing in silence and letting the truth speak louder than anything they ever tried to bury. The house was quiet again. Not the same kind of quiet it had been when Grandpa passed. That quiet was heavy with grief and loss. This one was different. This quiet was clarity. In the days after the memorial, everything shifted. Irene and Brian stopped showing up. No more texts, no more voicemails disguised as concern. Their silence was louder than any apology they never gave. I heard from Mr. Latham that the investigation had moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Turns out people who forge documents tend to get sloppy in the details, and when there's a paper trail built with arrogance instead of caution, truth finds its way to the surface. The accounts were frozen, bank records pulled, emails subpoenaed, and slowly the damage spread. Brian's new consulting firm lost its biggest investor. His partner pulled out the day after local news mentioned pending charges. Irene's social circle, tight, polished, shallow, began to shrink. People stopped inviting her to luncheons. Her name stopped appearing in donor lists. She told one of her friends that jealousy runs deep in families and that she was a victim of a smear campaign. But no one believed her. Not really. Even the whispers stopped being polite. As for the rest of the family, they did what families do when the ground shakes. They scattered. Some reached out quietly. A cousin sent flowers. An aunt called, fumbling through words like, "Didn't realize," Just assumed. Hope you're okay. I didn't hold it against them, but I didn't invite them over either, because survival and reconciliation are not the same thing. And I was still learning how to do the first. For the first time in what felt like years, the house felt like mine, but not in a celebratory way. Not in the way movies make you think it feels when you win. It felt like walking through the ruins of a home that had been loved too gently and fought over too violently. I spent mornings drinking tea from Grandpa's favorite chipped mug, watching light filter through the curtains. Sometimes I'd sit for hours without moving. Not because I was sad, but because I finally didn't have to defend anything. I burned the documents they left behind. Not the legal ones. The personal ones. The notes Irene wrote pretending to care. The cards Brian had mailed from business trips with empty phrases like, "thinking of you both." I didn't want those words in the house anymore. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway staring at the old oak-framed mirror Grandpa had hung back in the 70s. My reflection looked different now. Not older exactly, but more grounded. Like someone who'd been through a storm and wasn't afraid of the next one. I opened the drawer by the hallway table. The letter was still there, sealed. I hadn't touched it since the day of the memorial. Something in me had needed to wait, needed the noise to fade before I opened it. But now felt right. I took it upstairs, sat on the edge of Grandpa's old reading chair. The air smelled like paper and lavender and memory. I broke the seal. Inside, one sheet, handwritten. His script was familiar but shakier, still careful. "Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone." But not really. You know me better than to think I'd just disappear. You've always been my legacy. Not the books, not the house. You. I watched you love with both hands. I watched you stay when everyone else had somewhere better to be. I watched you become more than anyone around you was ever willing to see. I'm proud of you. Take whatever I've left and build something that matters. Not for them, not even for me, but for you. Live with the courage you gave me when I had none left, and if the world ever tries to make you small again, smile. And take up space. Love always, Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times. Once as his granddaughter, once as the little girl who used to spill tea on his books, and once as the woman I had become because he believed in me when no one else did. Then I folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into my coat pocket. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because something in me had shifted. His words didn't open a wound. They closed it. Later that evening, I stepped outside into the fading light. The sun was dipping low behind the hill, painting the sky with streaks of pale orange and rose. Grandpa would have called it a poetry sky. He had names for sunsets, like other people had names for pets. I carried the letter with me to the backyard, where the old oak tree still stood, thicker now, knotted and cracked with age, but still proud, still rooted, just like him. The wind rustled softly as I knelt beneath the branches. I pulled a small fireproof tin from under the bench and opened the lid. Inside was a single matchbox and a small dish I'd used when we burned letters in middle school, pretending to be witches casting out bad memories. But this wasn't pretend. This was real. I unfolded the letter once more, ran my fingers gently along the paper. His pen had pressed hard in some places. The last line had a tiny smear. He must have hesitated before signing. Or maybe his hand had trembled, but the ink still held. Then I struck the match. The flame flickered to life just like that. Small, brave, unapologetic. I held the letter to it and watched the corner curl. The fire climbed slowly at first, then faster as the words disappeared into orange and black. I leaned in, close enough to feel the warmth, but not so close that I had to pull back. There was something holy in the way it burned, like he was rising again, not to leave, but to become part of everything. When the last of the ash fell into the dish, I sat there for a long time. The tree above me creaked gently. A bird chirped from a distance. A car passed by out front, but it felt miles away. Everything was still. In that silence, I whispered my final goodbye. Not because I needed to let go of him, but because I finally understood he never really left. He had passed something down to me, more valuable than property or money or even memories. He gave me clarity. He gave me courage. And in doing so, he gave me back to myself. I stood, brushed the dirt from my coat, and walked back toward the house. The porch light flicked on as I approached, casting a soft glow on the front steps. For the first time since all of this began, the house didn't feel like a battlefield or a burden. It felt like possibility. Inside, I poured a cup of tea, Grandpa's favorite blend, Darjeeling with a slice of lemon. I sat in his chair, the one by the window, and looked out across the lawn, where the moon was rising quietly. I thought about how many nights he must have sat in this same spot, wondering if he'd done enough. Wondering if anyone would remember the things he'd tried to teach us. Now I knew the answer. I was the answer. I was the story he'd written without a pen, the inheritance he'd shaped with patience and time and presence, and I was still here, still growing, still listening, still loving him in the silence he left behind. Some memories don't fade. They settle into the corners of your life, soft and stubborn like dust in sunlight. After burning the letter, I found myself reaching for the past without even realizing it. I'd pass Grandpa's bookshelf and run my fingers along the spines like I used to when I was 10, searching for something that smelled like old pages. I'd open the back door and pause, waiting for his voice to call, "Leave your shoes out, Elle. Don't track the world into the house." He hadn't said that in years, but in my mind, he still did. One morning, I opened the hallway closet, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to feel near him. The faint scent of cedar and aftershave hit me like a memory. His scarf was still there, tucked between a mothball tin and a stack of winter gloves. I held it up to my face, closed my eyes, and time folded in on itself. And that's when I saw it. A thin, worn leather journal wedged behind the coats. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it also wasn't meant to be found casually. I took it to the dining table, sat under the soft glow of the overhead light, and opened the first page. There was no title, just a line in his handwriting. "If you want to leave something behind, don't carve it in stone. Whisper it in love." My breath caught. Each page was dated, stretching back 2 years. Some entries were long, others barely a line. Thoughts, observations, lines of poetry, half-finished, honest, messy. He wrote about missing Grandma, about feeling the world change too fast, about the joy of seeing me laugh when I didn't know he was watching. One page hit harder than the rest. Elena folded my laundry today. She didn't complain when the dryer ate one of her socks, just smiled, shook her head, and said, "It's okay, it's just a sock." God, I hope she keeps that softness. This world is too loud for hearts like hers. I read that page 3 times. I don't know why that moment meant so much to him, but maybe that's the point. Maybe love lives in the ordinary. Another entry was written shakier, just a few weeks before he died. "The house feels like it's waiting for something. I'm not afraid of leaving. I just hope the right person stays. The one who knows where the teacups go. The one who talks to the wind like it might answer. The one who remembers silence is sacred. If she stays, I can go." I didn't even realize I was crying until a teardrop hit the page. That was the thing about Grandpa. He didn't speak his love loudly. He didn't write it in caps lock or shout it across rooms. He left it in soup bowls, in dog-eared books, in carefully folded notes beside your lunch, in journals you find when the house is too quiet and your heart is too full. I closed the book gently. He didn't need marble or monuments. He had me, and I had his words. His real will wasn't the paper the lawyer read in that crowded room. It was right here, in ink and pauses and half-rhymed sentences that said, "You were seen, you were chosen, you mattered." I placed the journal back where I found it, but this time in a box with a soft cloth around it, like something precious. Because it was. And then I did what he would have done. I poured tea, sat on the porch, listened to the wind, and whispered, "I'll stay." Grief doesn't always show up wearing black. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed in an old flannel shirt, sitting at the breakfast table where there used to be 2 mugs instead of 1. It's subtle, domestic. It folds your laundry and waters your plants and slips into your bones before you realize it's moved in. But one morning I woke up and realized I could breathe again. Not perfectly, not all the way, but enough. Enough to notice the way sunlight hit the kitchen floor in soft, forgiving angles. Enough to hum while I poured tea. Enough to reach for joy, not like a desperate gasp, but like a memory I could hold without fear. I started cleaning, not just the house, but the corners of my life that had been gathering dust. I went through old boxes in the attic, letters from my mother I'd stopped answering, awards I didn't remember winning, photos of people I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't keep everything, just the pieces that made me feel whole instead of hollow. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went outside, not just to the porch, but out into the world. I walked to the market, bought fresh flowers I didn't need, talked to the baker who remembered my name. I even stopped by the coffee shop where I used to work. They offered me a shift. I smiled and told them thank you, but I had other plans now, because something had shifted. The loss didn't disappear, the betrayal didn't magically heal, but the weight of it no longer pinned me to the ground. It had become compost. And from it, something new had started to grow. That week, I pulled out Grandpa's old notebooks and flipped to a page I'd marked. It was a quote from a speech he gave years ago. "The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more steady hands, more kindness that expects nothing, more people willing to plant trees whose shade they'll never sit under." I read that line over and over. It felt like an instruction, a calling. So I started sketching ideas on the back of old grocery lists: community first aid programs, emergency training for senior citizens, a volunteer-based response team for our neighborhood where ambulances often came late and help came even later. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. I wasn't just healing, I was preparing. One evening I sat with Caleb in the backyard, the fire pit crackling between us. The stars were soft that night, low and scattered like someone had spilled them gently across the sky. "I think I want to do something with the inheritance," I said. He looked up from his cup. "Something? Something that helps people who never get helped, who always come last." He didn't ask what or why. He just nodded. And I knew he understood. Because this wasn't about legacy in the way most people think. It wasn't about plaques or foundations or glossy brochures. It was about building something from the ashes and calling it home. A home for others, for people forgotten, for people who, like Grandpa, gave everything quietly. I looked out toward the oak tree. Its branches swayed gently, like it had been listening the whole time. Maybe it had. Maybe the roots already knew what I was just beginning to realize. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. It means taking what broke you and turning it into shelter for someone else. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't want to waste what Grandpa left me. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about the hours, the memories, the quiet legacy of someone who gave everything and asked for nothing. And if I was going to carry that legacy forward, it had to mean something. So I went back to school. Not for another degree, not for a title. I signed up for an EMT certification course, a short, intense program that focused on the basics: how to show up fast, how to keep someone breathing, how to be useful when time was slipping away. I loved it. Not because it was easy, it wasn't. The nights were long, the material dense, the simulations stressful, but I felt alive again. Not distracted, not grieving, alive. There was one exercise where we had to stabilize a mannequin with a collapsed lung while talking to a simulated family member who was screaming nearby. Most people panicked or froze. I didn't. Later, the instructor pulled me aside and said, "You've got presence." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled, but deep down I thought, no, I've just been through worse. When I passed the course, I didn't throw a party. I pinned the certificate inside Grandpa's journal and whispered, "We did it." Then I got to work. With Caleb's help, I contacted local organizations, pitched a small idea that quickly grew: a volunteer-based community first aid center in the old firehouse 2 blocks from our neighborhood. It wasn't fancy. No one wore scrubs or carried pagers. We had folding chairs, a few defibrillators, basic medical kits, and a fridge full of cold packs and water bottles. But it was real, and it mattered. People started coming in. A teenage boy who twisted his ankle playing soccer, an elderly woman who fainted at the farmer's market, a delivery driver who had a panic attack in his truck. We weren't saving lives in the dramatic sense. We were catching people before they fell too hard. We were being present. We were filling a gap the system had ignored. Sometimes I'd come home with my shirt smelling like antiseptic and coffee, my shoulders sore from lifting, my eyes heavy. But I'd sleep better than I had in months, because now, every day felt like a thank you note to Grandpa, and not just for what he left me, but for what he taught me. That you don't need applause to make a difference. You just need to show up. So I did. Again and again. And for the first time since he passed, I wasn't carrying the weight of his loss. I was walking in the light of his love, and that made all the difference. Starting over isn't loud. It's not some cinematic scene where you throw open the windows, paint the walls, and declare yourself free. Starting over is slow, quiet. A choice you make every single day before your feet hit the floor. It's saying, I'll try again, even when your body wants to stay wrapped in the comfort of familiar grief. That's where I was. Every morning I poured tea into Grandpa's chipped mug, not because it was sentimental, but because it fit my hand better than the new ones. I let the sun find me in the kitchen and didn't rush to leave the moment. I just stood still, breathing. The community center was taking shape. Caleb helped retrofit an old storage closet into a proper triage room. We painted the walls a soft moss green and strung up white fairy lights around the windows. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. People felt safe there. I think that mattered more than anything. One afternoon, a man collapsed near the crosswalk outside the local grocery store. I didn't hesitate. I crossed traffic, knelt beside him, checked his pulse, stabilized his head, and called dispatch. His breath was shallow but steady, his skin cold but dry. I stayed with him, held his hand, and whispered things I'd want someone to say to me if I were scared and alone. You're not alone. Help is here. I'm not leaving. The paramedics arrived in under 5 minutes. They took over quickly, professionally. Before they loaded him into the ambulance, one of them turned to me and asked, EMT? Certified. I nodded. Good work, he said. And that was it. Not a parade, not applause. Just a quiet affirmation that I was becoming the woman Grandpa always saw in me. Later that night, Caleb and I sat on the porch. The air was crisp, carrying that early spring scent of damp earth and hope. He reached over and handed me a small wooden box. What's this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a silver bracelet. Simple, elegant. On the inside, a tiny engraving. Quiet is not weak. I swallowed hard. He'd been listening. I figured, he said, it was time to stop thinking of yourself as the girl who got left behind. I looked at him. Really looked. Caleb wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type to sweep you off your feet with declarations or roses. But he was steady, present. He showed up without needing to be asked, without expecting reward, just like Grandpa. Maybe that was why I trusted him with the parts of me I still didn't have names for. He pulled me gently against his shoulder, and we sat like that for a long time. No words, just presence. And I realized something. I wasn't building a new life. I was finally stepping into the one I'd always deserved. Not the life others expected of me. Not the one shaped by guilt or obligation, but one I chose. Fully, freely. With people who saw me not as the quiet girl in the corner, but as a woman who stood through the storm and came out carrying sunlight. The next morning, I returned to the center early. The neighborhood kids had drawn chalk hearts all over the sidewalk, and someone had left a basket of oranges at the door with a note, for the lady who helps people. I smiled. I didn't know who it was from. I didn't need to, because this was what healing looked like. Not perfection, not forgetting, but rebuilding something soft and strong from what was nearly broken, and for the first time in a long time I wasn't looking backward, trying to make sense of the pain. I was looking forward, with steady feet, and a heart wide open. You don't always find family in blood. Sometimes you find it in the woman who volunteers every Saturday just to fold blankets and bring banana bread, in the boy who bikes 5 blocks to deliver extra gauze after school, in the man who doesn't say much but who shows up every morning at 6 a.m. to sweep the sidewalk before the first patient arrives. These people didn't know my grandfather. They never sat in his kitchen or listened to his stories. But somehow they carried the same quiet kindness he did. They weren't flashy. They weren't loud. They were just steady. And in that steadiness, I found something I hadn't known I was looking for. One afternoon, I was restocking the supply shelf when a little girl walked into the center holding a crumpled drawing. Her mom trailed behind, apologizing. She wanted to bring this to the nurse, she said. I knelt down. The drawing was of me, stick figure version, of course, standing in front of the building with a big red heart over my head. Above it, in crooked handwriting, "Thank you for making people better." I taped it to the front desk. It's still there. That night, I told Caleb that something had shifted. I used to think family was something you were born into, I said. But maybe it's something you build, one kindness at a time. He smiled. Maybe the people we're meant to love aren't always assigned. Maybe they're chosen. I thought about Grandpa then, how he had chosen me long before I ever realized it, how he'd shown me what loyalty looked like, what tenderness felt like. And now somehow I was offering those same things to people I'd only just met, but who felt like home. There were no Sunday dinners, no holiday traditions, but there was trust, laughter, shared struggle, and healing. The center became more than just a place to patch up wounds or hand out aspirin. It became a place where people looked each other in the eye, where stories were exchanged with bandages, where a cup of tea meant more than a diagnosis. I didn't feel alone anymore. I didn't feel like the girl left off the invitation list, because here, no one asked for a bloodline, no one kept score. They just showed up, and in every shared moment, every quiet act of care, I felt Grandpa's presence. Not in spirit, but in legacy, in the way people cared for one another without expectation. That was the family he always wanted for me, and finally I had found it, not in a name, not in a will, but in the heartbeat of a community that chose love, every single day. The house is smaller now, not in size but in sound. No more ringing phones from people wanting things, no more footsteps pacing the hall with quiet resentment. Just the tick of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards under my socks. I sit by the window most evenings. Same wooden chair, same chipped mug. The light comes in soft here, like it's learned to whisper. Outside, the fields are beginning to turn gold with the end of summer. The wind moves through the tall grass like a memory you're not quite ready to let go of. I've started naming the breezes again, just like Grandpa used to. This one, I call it forgiving. Sometimes I read, sometimes I just listen, to birds, to wind, to silence. And sometimes, when I'm very still, I imagine Grandpa sitting beside me, his book resting on his lap, his breath slow and even. He never needed to fill the silence. He just let it hold space for whatever needed to rise. I've grown to love that kind of silence. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you, the kind that lets you arrive as you are. And here, in this stillness, I realize something. I didn't lose everything. I kept the only things that mattered. The kind of love that doesn't disappear when a door closes. The kind of family that lives in choice, not expectation. And a self I'm finally proud to come home to. I found the poem folded inside an old paperback copy of Leaves of Grass. It was tucked between two dog-eared pages, pressed flat like a secret never meant to be forgotten. The handwriting was unmistakably his, steady, slanted, a little faded from time. No title, just 4 short stanzas and a small note at the bottom that read, "For the one who stays." I took it to the window, where the late sun spilled across the sill like warm honey, and I read it aloud. Family isn't what the bloodline claims nor who appears when the will is read. It's who walks in when the room goes dark and sits beside you, wordless instead. I paused. My voice caught a little on the last line. The quiet of the house leaned in closer, as if listening. It's not the name stamped on the frame or stories passed through others' mouths. It's who remembers how you take your tea and still shows up when there's nothing to gain. That one made me smile. He always teased me for needing exactly 1 sugar cube and a splash of lemon. Not more, not less. Love isn't loud, nor is it proud. It folds your laundry, walks your dog, it picks up medicine without being asked, and holds your dignity when you're too tired to. I sat down slowly, letting each word stretch into the space between heartbeats. So if they ask who was my home, don't point to houses, land, or name. Say it was the one who never asked for more and stayed when everything else walked away. That was the end. I folded the paper again carefully, like something sacred. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The tears had come and gone in other seasons. This was something else. This was understanding. He never said I was family because of obligation. He said it because he meant it. Because I chose him, and he chose me back. And now, with the poem in my hand and his words in my bones, I knew something for certain. Legacy isn't measured in inheritance. It's measured in presence, in the love we leave tucked between the pages, and the silence that still carries our voice. I used to think freedom came with distance, that if I could just get far enough away from the betrayal, the grief, the weight of everything they tried to take from me, I'd be free. But freedom didn't meet me out there. It met me here, in a quiet house that still holds his breath, in the laughter of strangers who became family, in the moment I chose not to fight for validation, but to live in truth. Some people inherit land, some inherit money. I inherited a man who taught me how to stand still in a storm and trust that the wind would one day change. And it did. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for apologies that will never come. I'm building something from what survived, and that in itself is an act of power. If you're watching this and you've been the one left off the list, pushed to the side, told you weren't really family, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. You are not small. And you are not alone. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when the noise fades and the lights go out. It's who stays. And if you haven't found that yet, don't give up. Sometimes the family you're meant to have is the one you build from scratch, with love, sweat, and a little stubborn hope. So here's my call to you. If this story meant something to you, share it. Talk about it. Tell someone who needs to hear that walking away from toxicity isn't weakness, it's courage. And if you're still healing, take your time. But promise me one thing. When you're ready, take up space. Because you belong here, fully, freely, just as you are.